Welcome back. I'm talking with Representatives Grant Burgoyne, Democrat from District 16, House Seat A, and Representative John Vanderwode, Republican representing the folks from District 21, House Seat A also. We've been talking about the Idaho Land Board and what they do and what they're doing now, which is different from how it originally formed. To recap, right now there's a group of citizens that are working with you, if this is my correct understanding, and you have prepared an RS, which is a routing slip, that will become, once it's introduced, a bill, and it has to do with the fact that the Idaho Land Board is able to purchase private property, have businesses on it, and be in direct competition with private enterprise. So would you enlighten us a little bit about what's in the bill and what the purpose?
Yes. The bill would allow the state to buy land and to be a landlord. Essentially, to give you an example, the state could buy a strip mall, and it could own the land and it could own the buildings. And as a landlord, it could lease retail space to dollar stores and grocery stores and movie theaters and other businesses. Our bill would prohibit the state from actually owning the businesses that are leasing space in the strip mall.
As they can do now.
Yes.
And I guess they're doing it because there's nothing to preclude them from doing it. Is that right?
I actually do not believe that the Land Board has the authority to own businesses. The Constitution and our statutes authorize the Land Board to own land. Land means the earth and the structures on the earth, sure, but it doesn't mean that they can own an LLC and own and operate a business, in my opinion. Obviously, the Land Board disagrees.
Well, and of course, you have the mindset that if it doesn't say we can't, and that's part of the problem. That's always an ongoing argument in these cases.
And that's why we're drafting the bill, so it becomes clear what they can and can't invest their money in, what their operations should be.
Well, and here's the other question. Even if they buy the business and lease it to a private LLC, does that private LLC pay income tax and property tax if it's owned, in fact, by the Land Board?
Well, this becomes a little complicated, so bear with me for just a moment. Under our bill, they would not be able to buy the business, to own the business, and then lease the operation of the business to a third party. They would only be able to own the land and the structures on the land. Okay. And then if a business came along and said, I'd like to lease that space and have a storage unit business or have a dollar store or whatever, that would be a completely different LLC, and of course the operation of that business would charge its customers sales tax. Mm-hmm. If they had a profit, they would have to pay income tax on that. The only thing that they might escape is they might be able to have slightly lower rent because the state isn't having to pay property tax. Right. If the state is operating the business itself, as in the case of affordable storage, and owns the limited liability company that's actually operating the business, then what happens is the state doesn't have to pay income tax, and I suspect that the state, although I don't know 100%, may not need to be charging sales tax if there's any sales tax involved. Now, this is a rental of a storage unit. There may not be any sales tax involved, but if they had a different kind of business, that's kind of an open question.
It would depend, too, whether they sell locks for the units and this sort of thing.
Merchandise or
exactly,
stuff like that,
then they're going to be taxed. What about insurance? The state owns this facility. What about liability? What about, that sort of thing?
Yeah, and that's one thing I have not looked into at all. I mean, they own several buildings here in Boise. What they do for insurance rates, I assume they have to have, their other insurance policies and liability in place, but I don't know. If the state then becomes liable, or the endowments, could be that the endowments become liable for anything that comes up.
That would be something that would be worth looking into because, again, any private business owner is going to have some kind of liability insurance, right?
Yeah.
I don't know, perhaps the Attorney General did this I don't know whether the Attorney General did this or not, but one of the first things I would want to look at before acquiring a business in that situation is what's called the Tort Claims Act. Under American law, generally, states are immune from civil liability. So if somebody slips and falls on the property,
right,
generally you can't sue the state unless the state agrees to let you sue the state. So we have a thing called the Tort Claims Act, which says under what circumstances people can sue to recover damages. And before getting into the operation of a business, you'd want to look at the Tort Claims Act and see, now, is this something that the state is going to be exposed to liability for or not? And if the state is shielded from liability, whether it's fair under those circumstances to shield the state from liability. I think it's really very different to shield the state from liability for the decisions that we make in the legislature, for example, about passing bills and that sort of thing. It's different when you go to the state in a business capacity to do business with them, and you're injured, you're damaged, and then you can't recover from the state. Very different kind of circumstance. And I don't know the degree to which those issues have really been explored and looked at, but they concern me.
Well, the other thing you could have, especially if we're talking about this storage unit, what if somebody has oil, gas, or pollutes the ground?
Exactly.
Who's responsible for that liability if there's,
or
pollution? Or before they bought it, did they do an environmental check on
audit?
Correct.
Because I think one of the bills we got coming up in the House is about a company that bought a different company, and now they're being sued for the asbestos from what that company had before.
Sure.
And
well,
so
years
if the
ago,
state starts getting into that aspect of it, it could really help.
Years ago, there was a
endowment.
storage unit where they found a dead body, for heaven's sake, that had been put in there. I mean, there's all kinds of liability in situations like that. So that's why I asked a question as to how that's, if they're self-insured, how that works.
And understand how the state got into this storage unit business is, and that's part of what we got in the bill, is they sold some land, some endowment land, and in the current policy, they have 5 years to reinvest that money. So that money was sitting in there for 4.5 years in their bank account, and they had no place to go with it, and they were running out of time. And after 5 years, it goes into the permanent endowment fund. And so they were running out of time, so they had that $2 million that they quick then and bought this storage unit.
John, explain to us the difference between the permanent endowment fund. Why would they not want it to go into the permanent endowment fund?
Once it's in the permanent endowment fund, the principal can't be touched. It goes in there.
They can't play with it anymore.
They can't play with
Their
the money
monopoly
anymore.
money's all
It's
gone.
not a piggy bank. Once it goes out of there, it goes out of there. They no longer control it.
Okay.
So there was a constitutional amendment that gave them 2 years in the bank, and then the legislature changed it to 5 years. That they had 5 years before they had to reinvest. So they were running out of time on the 5-year time on this one because they hadn't found anything they could buy. And so, but the land that we've sold, because we originally had almost 1 million more acres of endowment land. All that land was sold. That money got transferred into the permanent endowment fund.
Okay.
And that's managed by investment firms out of New York. And so this, anytime now, money that they're trying to keep any other money from going into there and keeping it into their own little investment firm here.
Does Idaho have investment firms that can't handle the permanent endowment? Why are we going to New York?
They have a board that oversees it, but they have hired some, experts.
Why New York, though? I'm asking. Do we
where
not
most
have
of
the
the financial
capability?
stuff is doing it.
We have no capability here in Idaho?
Well, the way this is set up is the roughly 1 million acres that was sold off over the last 100 and some years since statehood, that generates cash. Mm-hmm. And the idea was, let's passively invest that cash essentially in the stock market. And so that is overseen by an endowment fund investment board, and that is different than the land board, which is our constitutional officers. Mm-hmm. And this endowment fund investment board is then authorized to hire professionals to invest that money, just like you might invest your retirement portfolio, I might invest my retirement portfolio. And so that's a managed fund, but once the money goes in to that permanent endowment fund, you can't get it back out, except to distribute to the various beneficiaries. Like you can take essentially some of the profits and distribute it to the schools, for example. But you can't give that money back to the land board to say go out and buy more land or to buy
Okay,
businesses.
I understand that, Grant, but what my question is, at some point you talked about New York handling some of the investments. Do we not have that capability here in the state? Why are we going out of the state of Idaho, especially, again, in these economic times when we have people here in Idaho that are doing their best to keep their businesses alive, to keep their families fed? Do we not have that capability? Do we not have asset managers here in the state that are able to do this?
I don't know the degree to which we're using New York-based investment advisors versus Idaho-based investment advisors for that work. I just don't know
It's
the
just
answer to that.
interesting when we have all these Buy Idaho campaigns to find out that the state's using New York to help with our...
And I can't say for sure that that's occurring, but I think we know the way the world works, and the fact is if you want to invest in the stock market, you have to pay some people in New York or San Francisco or Chicago, where the various stock exchanges are, to make that happen.
Right. But my point is that we do have asset managers that in this state that could possibly work with those. I'm just curious.
I would agree with that.
So tell us what your bill, you've told us a little bit about the bill. What kind of, how are you getting the word out to people to let people know about this, when the hearings are going to be, and what they can do in terms of coming? One of the things people need to know is that, you know, this is their government, and this does affect them. And even if you're not a business owner, it will affect you indirectly, because it affects all of us. When businesses go belly up, our economy goes belly up, it hurts everybody. People lose jobs and they can't feed their families. So what are you doing to involve the public?
Well, at this point, it's an RS. So until we have the hearing on Tuesday,
And it gets printed.
printed and becomes a bill. Then the bill becomes available to anybody who can, you know, get online and see what's in the bill and so on. So once that happens, then we will have, you know, a public hearing on it, and we'll invite people we know, or at least try to get the word out that, hey, you know, this is the time for public testimony on the bill and so on.
I should let people know, too, that on www.fyidaho.com, which is actually Legislative Watch is a subsidiary of fyidaho.com. If you go to that website, you will find links to the Idaho State Legislature. You'll also find other links to other things that may be of interest to you. But by going to the legislature, to their website, there's a mention of when the different committee meetings are, and you can even get copies of the bill. So one of the things that we will want to keep people informed of is, once we get a bill number on this, we can let people know the status of it, and we'll keep people informed. Yep. Well, I really want to thank you both for being on the program. Is there anything you want to say to people in terms of how they can get hold of you if they have questions?
Basically, you know, at our email for the house, it's pretty easy to get hold of us there, and or my home email or whatever. It's.
Let's give it to them quickly.
Okay, it's jvanderwoude@idahohouse.gov.
gburgoyne@house.idaho.gov.
And if you have problems, as I would, with the spelling of either one of those names, you can look it up in the Idaho State Legislature directory. For FY Idaho and Legislative Watch, I'm Elizabeth Allen Hodge. Thanks for joining us.